Lena Carter's palms slammed against the cold steel door as three men's flashlights swept the alley behind her, her lungs burning her mind, screaming one word over and over. Run. She had exactly 4 seconds to decide. Knock and risk exposing the most dangerous man in Chicago to a war that wasn't his. Keep running and die in an alley nobody would ever find. She chose. Her fist pounded against Adrian Vale's private entrance until the door tore open and the Mafia boss himself stood there, staring at a terrified stranger, gasping out the only lie she had left. I need a job. Please. Right now. If this is your first time watching, welcome. Subscribe now and stay until the very end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about fear power and the price of survival. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. Now let's go back to that door, and the night, everything changed forever. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and the second they did, Lena wanted to grab them out of the air and swallow them whole. Adrian Vale did not move. He did not blink. He looked at her the way a man looks at a puzzle piece that does not belong in the box. Excuse me. A job? Lena said again, quieter this time, because the first version had come out like a demand, and she knew better than to demand anything from a man like him. I heard you're hiring, kitchen, cleaning, anything. Behind Adrian, a stocky man in a black vest stepped forward, his jaw tight. This was Dante Reyes, the restaurant's manager, and the closest thing Adrian had to a gatekeeper. We don't take walk-ins, Dante said. Especially not through the back door at closing time. How did you even get past the fence? It was open. It's never open. Tonight it was. Dante's eyes narrowed, and Lena felt the old familiar tightening in her chest, the one that told her a conversation was about to turn into a threat. She had learned to read that shift the way other people read weather. A change in the shoulders, a change in the voice. She was already calculating the distance to the street, the traffic pattern, which direction had the most people. I'll go, she said quickly. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come here. She turned. Wait. The voice was calm, and it belonged to Adrian, and something about the way he said the single word made her feet stop moving, even though every instinct in her body was screaming to keep walking. What's your name? He asked. Lena. Lena Carter. You have a resume, Ms. Carter. She reached into the worn handbag slung across her body and pulled out a folded piece of paper, its edges soft from being carried too long in too many pockets. She held it out with a hand that was not quite steady. Adrian didn't take it right away. He studied her face first the way a man studies a room before he decides whether it's safe to sit down. Dante, he said without looking away from her. Give it to me. Dante snatched the paper from her hand more roughly than necessary and passed it to Adrian, who unfolded it and read in silence. The seconds stretched. 2 years at a diner in Ohio, Adrian said. A summer at a hotel in Pittsburgh. No references I can call tonight. I can start immediately. I don't need training. I'm a hard worker. I just need. She stopped herself. You just need what? Adrian asked. A paycheck, she said. That's all. It wasn't the truth, not the whole of it, and Adrian could hear the gap between her words and whatever she was actually feeling, the way you can hear a single wrong note in a song you've heard 100 times. We're not hiring, Dante said flatly. Mr. Vale, we have a full staff. Security's going to want to know how she got back here in the first place. I said wait, Adrian repeated. And this time there was an edge in it that made Dante go quiet immediately. Adrian folded the resume once slowly and slid it into his jacket pocket. Why here? He asked Lena. This isn't the kind of place a person walks into by accident. You had to know whose restaurant this is. Lena's throat worked. I heard you don't ask questions about people's pasts, as long as they show up and do the work. Who told you that? Someone at a shelter 3 blocks from here. It was a lie, and Adrian knew it was a lie, but he let it sit between them without correcting her, because he was more interested in something else entirely. He had spent 20 years learning to read people the way most men read a newspaper, quickly, automatically, without even trying. And what he was reading in Lena Carter did not match a woman looking for a paycheck. Her eyes kept flicking past his shoulder, toward the alley behind her, toward the street beyond that. Her weight was balanced on the balls of her feet, not her heels, the stance of someone ready to run. Her right hand had drifted without her seeming to notice toward the strap of her bag, gripping it the way a person grips something they cannot afford to lose. "You're not scared of me," Adrian said. Lena blinked. "What? Most people who end up back here uninvited are terrified the moment they realize who I am. You're not. You walked toward me, not away from me. That tells me you're not scared of the Mafia boss standing in front of you." He tilted his head slightly. "Which means you're scared of something else. Something worse." For a fraction of a second, something cracked open behind Lena's eyes, raw and unguarded, and Adrian saw it before she managed to slam the door shut again. "I'm not scared of anything," she said. "I just need work." Dante scoffed. "Mr. Vale, with respect, we don't need a woman off the street with a fake-looking resume and a story that doesn't add up. Let security walk her out." "No," Adrian said. Dante turned to him, genuinely startled. "No? She starts tonight." Lena's mouth opened, then closed. "Tonight," she repeated. "Trial shift, dishwashing station. Dante will supervise you personally." Adrian's gaze didn't leave her face. "If you're who you say you are, you have nothing to worry about." The way he said it made it clear he already suspected she wasn't. "Thank you," Lena managed. "Thank you, I won't." "Don't thank me yet," Adrian said, already turning toward the door. "You haven't seen how this restaurant works." He disappeared inside, and Dante stood there a moment longer, staring at Lena like she was a stray dog that had wandered onto his property and somehow tricked his boss into feeding it. "Follow me," he said finally. "And don't touch anything you're not told to touch." Lena followed him through the door, and the moment it shut behind her, sealing her inside, her stomach twisted with a feeling that was somehow both relief and terror at the exact same time. She was in. She was safe for tonight. But she was also trapped, and trapped was a word that had followed her through 3 cities already. Inside the kitchen moved like a machine. Every station occupied, every motion purposeful. A woman near the pass, dark-haired and quick-eyed, glanced up as Lena walked past. "New?" she asked. "Trial shift." Dante answered for her, not slowing down. "Huh." The woman whose name tag read Priya gave Lena a once-over that wasn't unkind, just curious. "Good luck. He doesn't usually do trial shifts." "Who doesn't?" "Mr. Vale. He lets Dante handle hiring. Weird that he stopped to deal with you himself." Lena said nothing because she didn't trust her voice not to shake. Dante led her to a station near the back stacked with trays and pans from the night's service and handed her an apron without ceremony. "Wash, dry, stack. Don't break anything. Don't talk to customers if any wander back here, which they shouldn't. Don't leave this station unless I tell you to." "Understood. And one more thing." Dante leaned closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear it. "I don't know what you're running from, but I know running when I see it. Mr. Vale might be curious about you. I'm not. The second you cause a problem in this restaurant, I make you disappear. You understand me?" Lena held his gaze, and something steadier than fear rose up inside her. Something that had gotten her through 3 cities and 2 fake names. "I understand," she said. "I'm not going to cause a problem." Dante studied her another second, then walked away, already barking orders at someone else. Lena turned to the sink, plunged her hands into the hot water, and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 6 weeks straight. For 20 minutes, nothing happened, and the nothing felt like the first mercy she'd been shown in a long time. She worked steadily, methodically, her hands finding a rhythm even as her mind spun through worst-case scenarios. A door swinging open too fast. A stranger's face turning toward her. A voice that sounded even slightly familiar. Then a tray clattered somewhere behind her, loud and sudden, and Lena spun around so fast she nearly dropped the plate in her hands, her whole body coiling like something ready to strike or flee. A young cook stood there, wide-eyed, holding up both hands. "Whoa! Sorry, I just dropped a tray." Lena forced her fingers to unclench from around the plate. "Sorry, you startled me." You caught that plate like you've done this for 20 years, the cook said, half impressed, half unsettled. "Reflexes like that." "Lucky catch," Lena said. But her heart was still hammering, and across the kitchen, Priya had stopped what she was doing to watch the exchange with narrowed, thoughtful eyes. Priya didn't say anything. She just filed it away the same way Adrian had filed away the way Lena's hand had drifted toward her bag strap, the same way every small detail about this woman seemed to be a piece of something no one in the restaurant had the full picture of yet. An hour into the shift, the restaurant's private dining room, reserved for the kind of clientele who paid to never be seen by the general public, filled with new arrivals. Dante appeared at the kitchen door and snapped his fingers at two of the staff. "We've got a party in the East Room. Full service. Move." Lena kept her head down, kept scrubbing, told herself it had nothing to do with her. Then a man in a gray suit walked past the kitchen's open doorway, close enough that Lena caught sight of him for exactly 1 second before her whole body went cold. She didn't recognize his face. She recognized his walk, the particular way certain men carried themselves when they worked for people who paid them to be invisible, until the moment they weren't. She turned back to the sink so fast that water splashed up the front of her apron. "Careful," Priya said, walking past with a tray. "You okay? You went white as a sheet." "Fine," Lena said. "Just tired." But she wasn't fine. And 10 minutes later, when the man in the gray suit reappeared in the kitchen doorway, this time, speaking quietly to Dante and holding up a phone screen for him to look at, Lena's whole world narrowed down to the sound of her own pulse in her ears. "You've seen this woman?" the man was asking. 26 brown hair might be going by a different name. Lena did not look up. She kept scrubbing a plate that was already clean, her hands moving on autopilot while every cell in her body screamed at her to run. Dante glanced at the phone, then around the kitchen, his eyes sweeping briefly, carelessly over the staff at their stations. "Doesn't ring a bell," Dante said. "We get a lot of faces through here. You want me to ask around?" "Not necessary. If she shows up, there's a number to call. Good money in it." "Sure thing." The man in the gray suit turned and walked away, and Lena did not breathe again until she heard the door swing shut behind him. Priya sidled up beside her a moment later, voice low. "You know something about that?" "No," Lena said too fast. "Okay," Priya said, in a tone that made it clear she didn't believe her but wasn't going to push, not yet. Lena's hands were shaking so badly now that she had to grip the edge of the sink to steady them. She had survived. This time. But the man had a photo. He had a description. And somewhere out there, someone was paying good money to find a 26-year-old woman with brown hair who kept changing her name. She had thought for one foolish, desperate hour that this restaurant might be a place she could disappear inside of. Now she understood the truth. There was no disappearing. There was only staying one step ahead until she couldn't anymore. At the end of the shift, well past midnight, Dante told her to wait by the back door while he checked with Adrian about her pay. Lena stood there alone in the narrow hallway, exhaustion pulling at every muscle, and she nearly jumped out of her skin when a door beside her opened and Adrian stepped through it alone. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request. She followed him down the hallway, away from the noise of the kitchen, until they reached a small office with the door left open, and he gestured for her to sit. She didn't. She stood near the doorway instead, close enough to the exit that her body felt marginally less like it was suffocating. "You did well tonight," Adrian said, settling behind the desk. "Dante says you didn't complain once. I'm not much of a complainer. I noticed something else too." He folded his hands on the desk, studying her with the same unreadable focus he'd had in the alley. A man came through my restaurant tonight showing a photo around. Did you see him? Lena's stomach dropped straight through the floor. No, she lied. You're lying to me, Ms. Carter. I'm not. You went pale the moment he walked past the kitchen. Priya noticed. I noticed. And you've been standing in this doorway for the last 90 seconds like you're calculating how fast you could reach that exit if I said the wrong thing. Lena's jaw tightened. I think I should go. Sit down. I'd rather stand. Adrian let the silence stretch, watching her the way a man watches a fire he isn't sure is contained. Let me tell you something about myself, he said finally. I don't like being lied to in my own restaurant. It's the fastest way to lose whatever trust I might have been willing to give you. But I also don't like watching a woman flinch every time a door opens or grip her bag like it's the only thing standing between her and disaster, and pretend I don't see it. So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want the truth. Who is looking for you? Lena's eyes burned, and she hated herself for how close she was to breaking down in front of a man she had known for exactly 4 hours. I can't tell you that, she said, her voice cracking despite her best effort to keep it steady. If I tell you, it puts you in danger too. And I've already gotten enough people hurt. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Something that wasn't quite surprise, but wasn't far from it either. Hurt how? Please. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Please don't ask me that. Not yet. I'll do the job. I'll work hard. I won't cause trouble. Just please don't send me back out there tonight without knowing if that man is still around. For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. He was a man who had built an empire on never showing his hand, never letting anyone see the exact moment he made a decision. But something about the raw, unguarded fear in Lena Carter's face pulled at a part of him he had buried a long time ago. There's a room upstairs, he said finally. Staff housing, small but secure. You'll stay there tonight. Lena blinked. I can't afford. I didn't ask you to pay for it. Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. No, Adrian agreed. I don't, but I own this building, and I decide who's allowed to be afraid inside of it. Tonight, you're not going back out onto a street where a man with a photo of your face is looking for you. That's not negotiable. Lena stared at him, searching his face for the catch, the price she would eventually have to pay for this kindness. Because in her experience, there was always a price. Why are you doing this? She asked again, quieter. Adrian stood walking around the desk toward the door, close enough now that she could see the faint old scar along his jaw, the kind of mark that told its own story if you knew how to read it. Because I know what it looks like when someone's spent months running, he said. I've seen it before. And I've learned that the people running the hardest are usually the ones telling the truth, even when they can't say it out loud yet. He held the door open for her. Go upstairs. Get some sleep. We'll talk tomorrow. Lena hesitated at the threshold, half convinced this entire night was some kind of trap she hadn't identified yet. But exhaustion and desperation won out over suspicion, and she stepped past him into the hallway. What neither of them said out loud, but what both of them understood in that moment, was that something had shifted. Adrian Vale did not offer safety to strangers. He had built his entire life around the principle that safety was a currency traded carefully, never given away. And yet here he was, handing it to a woman whose real name he didn't even know. Down the hall, unseen by either of them, Dante stood near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching the exchange with a deep, uneasy frown. He found Nico Belandi a few minutes later, Adrian's oldest friend, and the man who had helped him build the organization from nothing, standing near the private dining room, finishing a glass of scotch. We've got a problem, Dante said quietly. What kind of problem? Adrian just gave a stranger a bed upstairs. A woman who walked in off the street 4 hours ago with a fake-looking resume, and tonight some guy in a gray suit came through flashing a photo, looking for a woman matching her exact description. And Adrian didn't hand her over. He hid her. Nico's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. Hid her from who? I don't know. But whoever's looking for her has money, Real money. The kind that pays informants at restaurants like ours to keep their mouths shut and their eyes open. Nico set his glass down slowly. Does Adrian know what he's inviting into this building? I don't think he cares, Dante said. I think he's already decided. Nico was quiet for a long moment, turning the glass in his hand. Then we'd better find out exactly who's looking for her, he said finally, before it finds us first. Upstairs in the small plain room she'd been given, Lena sat on the edge of the bed with her bag clutched against her chest, unable to make herself lie down, unable to make herself believe, even for a moment, that she was actually safe. She unzipped the bag with trembling fingers and pulled out the one thing she had carried with her through 3 cities and 2 fake names, a folded piece of paper she hadn't let herself look at in almost a week. It was a printed photograph, creased and worn soft at the edges, of a woman who no longer existed, standing beside a name Lena hadn't spoken aloud since the night she ran. Tucked behind the photograph was a torn scrap of paper, and on it, in handwriting that wasn't her own, was a single line she had found slipped under her apartment door the night before she disappeared for good. We know where you are. It's only a matter of time. Her hands shook as she read it again, even though she had memorized every word months ago. Downstairs in his office, Adrian Vale sat alone at his desk, staring at the folded resume Lena had handed him hours earlier, the one with a work history that fell apart the moment you looked closely enough. His phone buzzed against the desk. He answered without a word. We got a hit, a voice said on the other end, low and businesslike. Guy canvassing restaurants downtown, showing a photo around asking about a woman. Brown hair 26 keeps changing her name, city to city. Word is, whoever's paying him has deep pockets and doesn't care how it gets done. Adrian's jaw tightened. Did he say a name? Adrian asked. The woman's real name. There was a pause on the other end. Yeah, the voice said. You want it? Adrian's eyes flicked toward the ceiling, toward the room above him, where a stranger who had walked into his life 4 hours ago was sitting alone in the dark, clutching a secret she was too afraid to speak out loud. Say it, Adrian said quietly. The voice on the other end of the line said a name, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Adrian Vale felt something cold settle low in his chest. The unmistakable feeling of a man who had just realized he'd let something far more dangerous than he expected walk straight through his front door. Orchestrated layered revelations through escalating confrontation, building relentless tension toward cliffhanger. Orchestrated layered revelations through escalating confrontation, building relentless tension toward cliffhanger. Adrian sat in the dark long after the call ended, the name repeating itself in his mind like a verdict he hadn't asked for. Elena Marsh. Not Lena Carter. Not the fabricated history on that folded resume. A different woman entirely, one who had apparently existed somewhere before she decided to erase herself. He didn't sleep that night. He sat with the name, turned it over, weighed it against everything he'd watched happen in his restaurant over the last 4 hours. The flinch. The gray suit. The photograph on a stranger's phone. None of it added up to a woman running from an angry ex or a bad debt. Men with deep pockets didn't pay canvassers to walk into a dozen restaurants for something small. By 6 in the morning he had made a decision, and Adrian Vale rarely reversed one once it was made. He found her in the small upstairs room exactly where he'd left her, sitting upright on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, as if she hadn't allowed herself to lie down all night. You didn't sleep, he said. Neither did you. How do you know that? Because men like you don't sleep when something doesn't add up. Lena's eyes were red-rimmed but steady. And I don't add up. Do I? Adrian stepped into the doorway, close enough to see the exhaustion carved into her face, the particular kind that came from months of never fully closing your eyes. Elena Marsh, he said. The name landed like a slap. Lena's whole body went rigid, her hand flying to the strap of her bag on instinct, and for one terrible second, Adrian thought she might actually try to run past him. Where did you hear that? She whispered. A man is paying good money to find a woman matching your description under that exact name. 26, brown hair. Changes cities like other people change clothes. Adrian's voice stayed level, but his eyes never left hers. I don't like being lied to under my own roof, Elena. I told you that last night. Don't call me that. Why not? It's your name. It's a dead woman's name. Her voice cracked on the word dead, and she hated herself for it, hated how fast the mask slipped when he said it out loud. Elena Marsh doesn't exist anymore. She hasn't existed in 6 months. Then who does exist? Because I'm looking at a woman who lied to my manager, lied to me, and nearly bolted out a locked door in the middle of the night because a stranger showed my staff a photo. That's not nothing. That's not a woman who just wants a paycheck. Lena stood putting the small room's limited distance between them, arms wrapped around herself like she was holding her own ribs together. You want the truth? I asked for it twice already. The truth is going to make you regret giving me a bed last night. Her voice shook, but there was something underneath the fear now, something harder. The truth is going to make you wish you'd let Dante throw me out the back door and never think about me again. Let me be the judge of that. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Then explain it to me, Adrian said, and for the first time something in his tone softened, just barely, just enough for her to notice. Because right now all I have is a fake name, a real name, and a man with money looking for you. I can't protect what I don't understand. The word protect seemed to catch her off guard. She stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. Why would you protect me? She asked. You met me 12 hours ago. Because I don't like men who send other men to hunt down 26-year-old women in the middle of the night, Adrian said simply. That's reason enough for now. The rest, I need you to give me. Lena closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had shifted, some final wall coming down out of sheer exhaustion. Or maybe because for the first time in 6 months, someone had asked instead of taken. His name is Victor Halden, she said. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very still, the way a predator goes still, right before it decides whether something is prey or threat. I know that name, he said quietly. Everyone who matters in this city knows that name, Lena said. He's not just a businessman, he's the businessman, boards, charities. Half the politicians in this state owe him something. How do you know him? I used to work for him. Lena's arms tightened around herself. I was his executive assistant for 2 years. I scheduled his meetings. I managed his calendar. I thought I had the best job of my life. What happened? I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Adrian said nothing, letting the silence do the work, and after a long moment, Lena kept going, the words coming faster now, like something that had been dammed up too long finally breaking loose. There were spreadsheets, she said, financial transfers, shell companies. At first I thought it was tax stuff, something boring, something above my pay grade. Then I found names, women's names, ages next to them, locations, payment schedules that didn't match any legitimate business I'd ever heard of. Her voice dropped. I didn't understand what I was looking at, not at first. Then I did. Trafficking, Adrian said. Lena flinched at the word, but nodded. Not just trafficking, a whole network, recruiters, buyers, people who made sure nobody ever asked the right questions. And Victor Halden wasn't some low-level piece of it. He was funding it, laundering money through 3 of his companies to keep it running. You went to the police. I tried. A bitter laugh escaped her, hollow and humorless. I made copies of everything. I found a detective who seemed like he might actually care. 2 days later, my apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was destroyed. Just moved. Just enough to let me know someone had been inside going through my things, making sure I understood they could reach me anytime they wanted. And the detective? Lena's face went pale in a different way now, grief instead of fear. He stopped returning my calls, she said. 3 weeks later, I read that he'd been killed in a car accident on a road he drove every single day for 11 years at 2 a.m. when he had no reason to be out. Adrian's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. You think it wasn't an accident? I know it wasn't an accident. Her eyes filled, and she blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall in front of him. That's when I understood. This wasn't a company doing something wrong on the side. This was an organization. Structured. Protected. People at every level making sure it never got exposed. And I was the only person outside of it who'd seen the whole picture. So you ran. I didn't have a choice. My best friend Danielle, she helped me back up the files onto a drive, helped me plan how to get out of the city. 2 weeks after I left, she went missing. Lena's voice broke completely now, no longer able to hold the wall up. Nobody's heard from her since. Her family filed a report. Nothing happened. Nothing ever happens to these people. The room went quiet, heavy with everything she'd just laid down between them. "Where's the drive now?" Adrian asked finally. "Buried somewhere in Ohio in a place only I know. I haven't touched it in months. I didn't want to lead anyone to it." "You never went to the media." "With what credibility? I'm a former assistant who got fired for, quote, performance issues the week after I found those files. That's what's in my personnel record now." Victor made sure of it before I even knew what was happening. Nobody believes an unemployed 26-year-old with a grudge against her old boss, especially not when he's got charity galas and hospital wings named after him. Adrian exhaled slowly, and for the first time since she'd walked through his back door, Lena saw something in his face that wasn't calculation. It looked disturbingly like anger, not at her. "You've been running for 6 months, he said. 6 months, 3 cities, 2 fake names before Lena Carter. She wiped roughly at her eyes. "And now you know why a man showed my photo around your restaurant last night. Now you know exactly what you invited upstairs. So go ahead. Tell me to leave. I'll go. I won't make it difficult." Adrian didn't answer right away, and the silence stretched long enough that Lena's stomach twisted into a knot, certain she was about to hear the sentence she'd been dreading. "Get out. I can't have this in my building. You've put everyone here at risk." Instead, he said something else entirely. "Victor Halden has crossed my organization before." Lena's head snapped up. "What?" 3 years ago, a shipping contract. He tried to undercut a deal I had locked down by leaning on a city inspector I'd already paid off. A muscle worked in Adrian's jaw. "I've hated that man since before I ever knew your name." "That doesn't mean you should get involved in this. This isn't a shipping contract, Adrian. This is people. This is women who disappear and nobody looks for them because they're the kind of women nobody bothers looking for. I know exactly what it is. Then you know how dangerous it is?" "I've spent my entire life being dangerous," Adrian said, and there was something final in his tone. Something that told Lena the decision had already been made somewhere in the last 30 seconds, and there would be no talking him out of it now. "The difference is, until this morning, I never had a reason to point that at Victor Halden. Now I do." Lena stared at him, torn between relief, so powerful it made her knees weak, and terror at the idea of one more person being pulled into the wreckage of her life. "People who helped me end up dead," she said quietly. "Danielle. The detective. I can't let that happen to you." "Nobody has ever successfully told me what I can and can't let happen," Adrian said, and for just a moment, something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "You're not the first person to try." Before Lena could respond, a sharp knock hit the door, and both of them turned as Dante pushed it open without waiting for permission, his face tight with urgency. "We've got a situation," Dante said. "What kind of situation?" Adrian asked, already moving. "The gray suit guy from last night. He's back, parked across the street, been sitting there for 20 minutes. Lena's blood went cold. "He's watching the restaurant," Dante continued. "Not moving, just watching." Adrian's face hardened into something Lena hadn't seen yet. Something that made her understand in one single glance exactly how a man built an empire like his. "Get Nico," Adrian said. "Now." Dante disappeared, and Adrian turned back to Lena, his voice low and controlled, despite the storm visibly building behind his eyes. "Stay in this room. Door locked. Don't open it for anyone but me, Dante, or Nico. Do you understand?" "Adrian." "Do you understand?" Lena nodded, throat too tight to speak, and Adrian left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. Alone. Lena sank back onto the edge of the bed, pulling her knees up to her chest, listening to the muffled sound of footsteps and voices moving through the building below her. For 6 months, she had trained herself never to feel safe anywhere, because feeling safe was exactly the moment danger found you. But something about the way Adrian had said the words, "Nobody has ever successfully told me what I can and can't let happen," sat differently in her chest than any promise anyone had made her since this nightmare began. Downstairs, Nico met Adrian near the kitchen entrance, his expression grim. "Dante says we've got a watcher outside." "We do." "You want to tell me what's going on? Because Dante's been talking about a woman who showed up out of nowhere, a hitman-looking guy flashing photos, and now you're pulling me out of bed at 7 in the morning." Nico's eyes narrowed. "This have something to do with the girl upstairs?" "Her name is Elena Marsh," Adrian said. "She used to work for Victor Halden." Nico went very still. "Victor Halden," he repeated. "She found something in his files. Something that got her fired, hunted, and got a detective killed for taking her seriously." Adrian's voice was flat, controlled the voice he used when he had already decided a course of action and was simply informing people of it, rather than asking their opinion. "Halden runs a trafficking operation laundered through 3 shell companies. She's the only person alive who's seen the full scope of it." Nico exhaled slowly through his nose. "And you believe her?" "I believe the man in the gray suit outside my restaurant right now." "So what's the play?" "We find out who he's working for exactly. We find out how many more of them there are, and we make sure nobody touches that woman while she's under my roof." Adrian's eyes flicked toward the front window, where through a gap in the blinds, the parked sedan was visible across the street unmoving. "Get 2 men on that car, not confrontational. I want to know who's inside it and who they report to." Nico hesitated. "Adrian, Victor Halden isn't some rival crew boss we can lean on and walk away clean. He's got politicians, judges, a police commissioner who owes him his pension. If we go after him directly, this isn't a business dispute anymore. This is a war with the entire system behind him." "I'm aware." "Are you sure this is worth it for a woman you met last night?" Something flashed across Adrian's face, quick and sharp. "Danielle," he said. "What?" "Elena's best friend. She helped her back up evidence, helped her plan her escape. 2 weeks later, she disappeared. No trace. No investigation that went anywhere." Adrian's jaw tightened. "That's what happens to people who help her. I know exactly what I'm walking into, Nico. I'm walking into it anyway." Nico studied his oldest friend for a long moment, searching for something in his expression he clearly wasn't used to seeing there. "You've never talked about a woman like this," Nico said quietly. "Not once, not in 20 years. This isn't about that. Isn't it?" Adrian didn't answer, and the silence said more than any denial could have. Outside, across the street, the man in the gray suit finally started his car and pulled away from the curb, disappearing around the corner. But nobody in the restaurant relaxed. They all understood, without needing to say it out loud, that this was only the first pass. The watcher would be back, or another one would take his place, and eventually Victor Halden's people would stop watching and start acting. By mid-morning, Priya found Lena still locked in the upstairs room, having been sent up with a tray of food and strict instructions from Dante not to let anyone see her carry it. "Knock, knock," Priya said through the door. "It's just me." Lena opened it cautiously, and Priya slipped inside, setting the tray down on the small table. "Everyone downstairs is acting like the building's on fire," Priya said, watching Lena's face carefully. "Dante's got 2 guys watching the street. Nico looks like someone stole his car, and Mr. Vale hasn't said a word to anyone in an hour, which from what I hear is worse than if he were yelling." "I'm sorry," Lena said. "I never meant to bring trouble into this place." "Trouble found you," Priya said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "That's different than bringing it. I've worked here 2 years. I know the difference between someone running a scam and someone running for their life. You've got the second kind of eyes." Lena looked away, unable to hold the sudden, unexpected kindness in the other woman's voice. "Can I ask you something?" Priya said. "And you don't have to answer if it's too much." "Okay," Whatever you did, whatever you saw, whatever's chasing you. Priya's voice was gentle but steady. Was it worth it, knowing what it's cost you? Lena thought about Danielle, about the detective whose name she still knew by heart, about 6 months of never sleeping through a full night, never staying anywhere long enough to unpack a bag completely. I don't know yet, she admitted. Some days I think I should have just looked away, kept my job, kept my life. Other days I think about how many more women are still out there, still trapped because nobody was willing to see what I saw. Her hands twisted together in her lap. I guess I'll know if it was worth it depending on how this ends. How do you think it ends? I used to think it ended with me dead in an alley somewhere and nobody ever knowing why. Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. Last night, for the first time in 6 months, I let myself think it might end differently. Priya's eyes softened. Because of him. Lena didn't answer, but she didn't need to. 2 floors below, Adrian sat alone in his office, staring at a folder Nico had brought him an hour earlier, a folder containing everything Adrian's own people had managed to compile on Victor Halden in the space of a single frantic morning. It wasn't much. Public records, charity board memberships, business partnerships that all seemed legitimate on the surface. But buried in the middle of it was a name that made Adrian's blood run cold. A shell company called Meridian Logistics Group. One of 3 Lena had mentioned, listed a registered agent whose name Adrian recognized immediately because that man had sat across from him at a business dinner 18 months ago. Shaken his hand and smiled while quietly angling for a piece of Adrian's shipping routes. Councilman Ray Doss, a city councilman with oversight on Port Authority contracts, quietly moonlighting as a registered agent for a shell company connected to Victor Halden's trafficking network. Adrian sat back slowly in his chair, the full scope of what he was walking into finally taking shape in his mind. This wasn't going to be a simple matter of leaning on one wealthy businessman. This was a web threading through the exact institutions that were supposed to stop men like Victor Halden. And if Adrian pulled too hard on the wrong thread, he risked exposing not just Halden, but half the city's power structure along with him. He picked up his phone and called Nico. I need everything we have on Councilman Ray Doss, Adrian said. Discreetly. Nobody outside this building hears his name mentioned. Ray Doss, the Port Authority guy. Nico's voice sharpened with alarm. Adrian, what did you find? His name's on the paperwork for one of Halden's shell companies. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. This just went from dangerous to catastrophic, Nico said quietly. You understand that, right? If Doss is dirty and he's connected to Port Authority contracts, that means Halden's network might be moving more than money through those shell companies. That means we could be looking at trafficking routes running directly through cargo Doss has oversight on. I understand exactly what it means, Adrian said. That's why I need it confirmed before we move on anything. And if it's confirmed, Adrian's eyes drifted toward the ceiling again, toward the room upstairs, where Elena Marsh, a woman who had walked into his life less than 24 hours ago, was sitting with a truth so dangerous it had already cost her best friend her life. Then we take down Victor Halden's entire operation, Adrian said. All of it. Every shell company, every dirty official, every piece of it. Not because it's good business, because it's the only way that woman upstairs ever gets to stop running. He hung up before Nico could respond, and sat alone in the silence of his office, staring at the folder in front of him, understanding fully for the first time the size of the war he had just chosen to enter. That afternoon, the tension in the restaurant broke in a way nobody expected. A delivery truck pulled up outside exactly on schedule, the same produce vendor that had been supplying the restaurant for 3 years. Nothing unusual about it, nothing that should have raised any alarm. Except that when Dante went to check the delivery manifest against the order, he found an extra item tucked inside one of the crates wrapped in plain brown paper addressed to nobody. He opened it in the kitchen, and the moment he saw what was inside, his face went white. It was a photograph. Lena, taken from across a street, walking into the restaurant's front entrance 2 days before her back door arrival time stamped in the corner. Someone had been watching this location before she ever set foot inside it. Clipped to the photograph was a note handwritten brief and utterly chilling. "Tell your boss he's making a mistake. She's not worth what's coming." Dante's hands shook as he carried it to Adrian's office, and the moment Adrian read it, the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "They knew she was coming here before she even walked in the back door," Adrian said slowly. "This wasn't a random restaurant she wandered into for a cleaning job." "You think Halden's people led her here on purpose?" Dante asked. "Why would they do that? I don't know yet." Adrian's eyes were hard, calculating, running through every possible explanation. "But I intend to find out." He called Lena down to his office immediately, and when she saw the photograph on his desk, all the color drained from her face at once. "That's me," she whispered. "2 days ago. I remember walking past here. I was scouting locations, trying to find somewhere I could disappear into for a while." "You didn't choose this restaurant randomly." "I did. I swear I did. I walked past a dozen places that week. This was just the one that felt." She stopped, her brow furrowing. "It felt right. Safe somehow. I don't know why." "Someone photographed you outside this specific building 2 days before you walked through my back door," Adrian said. "That's not a coincidence, Elena. Someone either followed you here or someone wanted you to end up here. Why would anyone want me here in your restaurant? You're the last person Victor Halden would want me anywhere near, given the history between you two." Adrian's jaw tightened as a new, darker possibility took shape in his mind. "Unless that's exactly the point," he said slowly. "Unless someone wanted you here specifically because of the history between me and Halden. Wanted a confrontation. Wanted me pulled into this. Why would anyone want that?" "I don't know yet," Adrian admitted. "But I intend to find out, and until I do, nobody outside the people already in this building can know you're here. Not staff who aren't already aware. Not vendors. Nobody." That evening, as the restaurant prepared for its dinner service, Nico returned with confirmation that shattered whatever fragile stability had settled over the day. "Ray Doss is dirty," Nico said, closing Adrian's office door behind him. "Confirmed. He's been sitting on Meridian Logistics books for 4 years, taking payments disguised as consulting fees. And it gets worse." "How much worse?" "Meridian Logistics has a standing contract with the Port Authority for cargo inspection exemptions on 3 shipping lanes. Lanes that, according to a contact I trust, have seen unusual container traffic. Late-night arrivals, minimal documentation, the kind of pattern you'd expect if someone were moving something they didn't want inspected too closely." Adrian's hands curled into fists on the desk. "People," he said quietly. "They're moving people through those lanes. I can't confirm that yet, but it fits everything Elena told you." Before Adrian could respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupted them, and Dante burst in without waiting, his face pale and urgent in a way that made both men rise from their seats instantly. "We've got a problem," Dante said. "A bigger one." "What now?" "Priya just told me Lena's missing from the upstairs room." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Adrian's feet. "What do you mean missing?" "I mean the door's unlocked, the room's empty, and nobody's seen her in the last 20 minutes. Dante's voice was tight with panic. "Adrian, if someone got to her." Adrian was already moving out the door and down the hallway before Dante finished the sentence, his heart hammering against his ribs with a fear that felt disturbingly unfamiliar, disturbingly personal for a man who prided himself on never letting emotion outrun his judgment. He took the stairs 2 at a time, reaching the upstairs hallway, to find the door exactly as Dante had described it, hanging open the room beyond, it empty the small bag Lena had carried everywhere with her, sitting untouched on the bed. She wouldn't have left without the bag. Not willingly. "Elena." Adrian's voice tore through the hallway raw, in a way he barely recognized. "Elena, where are you?" Silence answered him. And for one suspended terrible moment, Adrian Vale, a man who had spent 20 years without flinching in the face of violence, felt something close to panic clawing up his throat. Then, from further down the hall, past a door he hadn't noticed before, tucked into an alcove near the old service stairwell, he heard it. A voice low, urgent, speaking too quietly to make out words, but unmistakably Lena's. Adrian moved toward it silently. Every instinct sharpened, ready for the worst, and pushed the door open to find Lena standing alone near a small window at the end of the corridor, a cracked old cell phone pressed to her ear, her back to him, her shoulders shaking. "Please," she was saying, her voice breaking. "Please just tell me she's alive. That's all I need to know. Just tell me Danielle's alive." Adrian froze in the doorway, understanding in an instant that he had just interrupted something far more fragile than danger. Lena spun around at the sound of his footsteps, the phone slipping from her hand and clattering against the floor, her face a mask of raw, unguarded grief. "Adrian," she gasped. "I'm sorry I didn't. I found an old contact's number, someone who might know something about Danielle. I just needed to know if she was." She couldn't finish the sentence. Adrian crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and did something that surprised them both. Something that had nothing to do with strategy or protection or the careful, calculated control he brought to every decision in his life. He simply reached out and pulled her into him, and Lena, after 1 stunned second of resistance, broke down completely against his chest, 6 months of terror and grief finally cracking through the wall she'd built to survive it. "I've got you," Adrian said quietly, his voice rough. "I've got you. You're not alone in this anymore." Neither of them noticed the cracked phone still lying on the floor, its screen dark, the call already disconnected, or the small cold detail that would matter more than either of them understood yet. The number Lena had dialed, the old contact she believed might know something about her missing friend, had connected for exactly 4 seconds before going silent. 4 seconds was more than enough time for whoever was on the other end to trace the call back to a restaurant on the east side of the city. A restaurant that until tonight, Victor Halden's people had only suspected was harboring the woman they'd been hunting for 6 months. Now they knew for certain. Adrian didn't let go of her right away. He held on a moment longer, long enough to feel the shudders in her shoulders slow long enough to steady his own voice before he spoke again. "Who was on the phone?" he asked quietly. Lena pulled back, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Embarrassed now, the adrenaline of the call draining out of her and leaving something rawer behind. "A woman named Carol," she said. "She used to work the front desk at Danielle's building. I thought maybe if anyone would know something, it would be her. She used to notice everything, every visitor, every package, every strange car parked too long outside." "Did she tell you anything?" "She didn't get the chance." Lena's throat tightened. The line went quiet. I don't know if she hung up or if something happened. Adrian bent down and picked up the phone from the floor, the screen dark, unresponsive. He turned it over in his hand, and something about the stillness in his face made Lena's stomach drop. "What is it? How long was the call connected before it disconnected?" Lena thought back, replaying it. A few seconds, maybe 4 or 5 before Carol even said hello. "That's enough time to trace a location on an unsecured line," Adrian said. "If whoever's looking for you has the resources, I think they do." The color drained from Lena's face for the second time in 5 minutes. "You think they know I'm here?" "I think we have to assume they do." Adrian's voice didn't rise, didn't crack, but something in it turned to iron. "Which means we don't have the luxury of time anymore." He guided her back toward the small room, and this time he didn't leave her at the door. He stepped inside, closed it behind them both, and sat her down on the edge of the bed like a man handling something fragile that he refused to let break on his watch. "Listen to me," he said. "Whatever happens in the next few hours, I need you to trust that every decision I make is built around one thing: keeping you alive. Do you understand?" "I don't even know you," Lena whispered. 24 hours ago, I didn't know your name existed outside of rumors." "Then trust the 24 hours you've had instead of the 6 months before it," Adrian said. "Trust what you've seen, not what you assume." Before she could answer, the door burst open without a knock, and Nico filled the frame, his face grim in a way that told Adrian everything before a single word left his mouth. "We've got movement," Nico said. 2 cars parked a block out in opposite directions. Not the same guy from this morning. Different plates, different builds. Professionals. Adrian was on his feet instantly. How many? At least 4 that we can see. Could be more we can't. They're not here to watch anymore. Adrian said more to himself than to either of them. No, Nico agreed. I don't think they are. Lena's hands were shaking again, that old familiar tremor returning full force, and she hated herself for how quickly the fragile calm from moments ago had shattered. This is exactly what happened before, she said, her voice climbing toward panic. This is exactly how it went in Cleveland. Cars outside, waiting, watching. Then what? Adrian asked, gripping her shoulders gently, forcing her eyes to his. Then my apartment building caught fire at 2 a.m, Lena said. Fire department called it faulty wiring. I was 3 blocks away when it happened because I couldn't sleep and went for a walk. If I'd been inside. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Adrian's jaw tightened to the point of visible strain. That's not happening tonight. Not in this building. Not while I'm standing in it. You can't promise that. I don't make promises I can't keep, Adrian said. I make plans, and I've had one forming since the moment I saw that photograph on my desk. He turned to Nico. Get Dante. Full lockdown on the restaurant. Nobody and nobody out through the front until I say otherwise. Kitchen staff go home through the service tunnel, the one we used during the Marchetti trouble 2 years back. You think it's that serious? I think 4 professionals parked in a perimeter around my restaurant is exactly that serious, Adrian said. Go. Nico disappeared, and Adrian turned back to Lena, whose breathing had gone shallow and fast, panic visibly climbing despite every effort to hold it back. Look at me, Adrian said, crouching slightly so they were eye level. I need you present, not 6 months ago, not Cleveland, right here. I'm trying. I know you are. His voice gentled just slightly. You survived Cleveland. You survived every city before this one. You're going to survive tonight too. But I need you thinking clearly because I need to know something only you can tell me. What? The evidence. The files you backed up before you ran. Is there any way at all, someone could know exactly where you buried that drive? Lena shook her head slowly. No. Only Danielle knew the location, and she never wrote it down. We agreed on that specifically in case something like this happened. Then that drive is the only thing keeping you alive right now, Adrian said. As long as Victor Halden doesn't know if you've already sent it somewhere, doesn't know if it's already in the wrong hands, he has to be careful. The moment he's certain it's gone, or certain he can silence you before you can retrieve it, that carefulness disappears. So what do? We make sure he stays uncertain, Adrian said, and we make sure the men outside my restaurant understand that taking you means starting a war they cannot win. Downstairs, the restaurant had transformed in the span of 10 minutes from a dinner service into something closer to a fortress. Dante moved through the kitchen barking orders, ushering staff toward the service tunnel exit, while 2 of Adrian's men took positions near the front windows watching the street through gaps in the blinds without ever fully revealing themselves. Priya, gathering her things to leave with the rest of the staff, found a moment to catch Dante's sleeve. Is she going to be okay? Priya asked quietly. Lena, is she going to be okay? I don't know, Dante admitted, and for a man who had spent the entire first day treating Lena's arrival as an inconvenience at best, and a liability at worst, something had shifted in his voice, something closer to genuine concern. But Adrian's not going to let anything happen to her without a fight. That much I know. You actually believe that? I've worked for that man 12 years, Dante said. I've never seen him move like this for anyone. Not once. Priya absorbed that in silence, then slipped out through the tunnel with the rest of the departing staff, leaving the restaurant emptied of everyone except the people Adrian trusted with his life. Back upstairs, Nico returned to Adrian's side with an update that deepened the lines already carved into Adrian's face. One of the cars just moved, Nico said, repositioned closer to the service entrance. They know about the tunnel exit. That's not a guess anymore, Adrian said. That's inside knowledge. You think someone's feeding them information? I think it's the only explanation that makes sense. Adrian's eyes swept the room, cataloging every face he'd trusted with knowledge of this building's layout over the years. Who else knew about that tunnel besides senior staff? Just the people who were here for the Marchetti situation. Yumi, Dante, and... Nico stopped himself. And who? Adrian pressed. Councilman Doss. Nico said slowly, the realization landing in his voice as he spoke it aloud. He was here that night, at the private dinner. He saw us use it when things got tense with the health inspector situation. Adrian went very still. Ray Doss knows the layout of my building. He said each word deliberate cold. And Ray Doss is on Victor Halden's payroll. That's not proof he's the leak. No, Adrian agreed. But it's more than coincidence, and I don't believe in coincidence when it comes to my own building being surrounded. Downstairs, a soft knock echoed against the restaurant's front door. Deliberate, unhurried, the kind of knock that belonged to someone who had no intention of forcing entry because they were confident they wouldn't need to. Dante approached the window cautiously and peered through the blinds. A man stood alone on the sidewalk outside, hands visible, dressed not in the gray suit from the day before, but in something more expensive, more deliberate. He carried himself like a man who had never once in his life doubted that a door would open for him. Adrian! Dante called up the stairs, his voice tight. You need to see this. Adrian descended quickly. Lena trailing a step behind, despite his instruction for her to stay upstairs, unwilling to be left alone, not knowing what was happening below her. He looked through the gap in the blinds and felt something settle in his chest, cold and certain. Open the door, Adrian said. Adrian? Nico's voice carried a warning. Open it, Adrian repeated. I want to look him in the eye. Dante unlocked the door, and the man outside stepped through with the unhurried confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable, his eyes sweeping the restaurant's interior with mild, almost bored curiosity before settling on Adrian. Mr. Vale, the man said, my employer sends his regards. I didn't ask for regards, Adrian said. I didn't ask for men circling my building either. Consider it a courtesy, the man said. My employer prefers to handle matters directly rather than through unnecessary complications. He's aware you're currently housing something that belongs to him. Behind Adrian, Lena's breath caught audibly, and the man's eyes flicked past Adrian's shoulder to find her standing in the hallway, and something in his expression shifted, satisfied, almost pleased. Elena, he said, an unpleasant warmth in his voice. You've caused quite a lot of trouble for someone who used to be so good at following instructions. She's not your property, Adrian said, stepping deliberately into the man's line of sight, blocking him from Lena entirely. And you're going to walk out of my restaurant the same way you walked in, empty-handed. Mr. Vale. The man's tone remained maddeningly pleasant. I understand the appeal of playing hero, but you should know exactly what you're standing between. My employer has resources that extend far beyond anything a restaurant owner, however well-connected, can match. Police commissioners, judges, city council members who make certain inconvenient investigations simply never begin. I know exactly what your employer has, Adrian said. I also know what I have. And what I have is a very specific, very personal grudge against Victor Halden that predates whatever business you think you're conducting tonight. Something flickered across the man's composed face, for the first time a note of genuine surprise. This isn't personal for you, the man said. This is a woman you met yesterday. This became personal 3 years ago, Adrian said. You can tell your employer that. Tell him I remember exactly how he tried to undercut my shipping contracts by bribing a city inspector. Tell him I've been waiting 3 years for a reason to remind him what happens to men who cross me. He just handed me one. The man's pleasant expression finally cracked just slightly, just enough to reveal something colder underneath. That's a mistake, he said quietly. We'll see whose mistake it turns out to be. The man studied Adrian for a long moment, then let his gaze drift once more toward Lena, standing rigid in the hallway, before turning and walking back out the door without another word, disappearing into the darkness beyond the restaurant's front windows. The moment the door closed behind him, the tension in the room didn't ease. If anything, it sharpened. That went about as well as it could have, Nico said grimly, which is to say not well at all. "He knows we're not backing down," Adrian said. "That buys us something." "It also means he's going to move faster," Nico said. "Men like that don't send a polite messenger unless the next step is significantly less polite." Lena had gone very quiet, staring at the door the man had just walked through. Her arms wrapped tight around herself. "That was Marcus," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Victor's personal fixer. If Marcus came here himself, that means Victor's genuinely worried. He doesn't send Marcus for small problems." "Good," Adrian said. "Let him worry." "You don't understand," Lena said, turning to face him, her eyes wide with a fear that had sharpened into something closer to certainty. "Marcus doesn't make threats he doesn't intend to follow through on. If he walked out of here without me, that means the next people who come won't be asking politely." As if summoned by her words, Dante's radio crackled to life from where he'd stationed himself near the front window, and his voice, when it came, was tight with alarm. "Adrian, second car just moved. They're pulling around toward the alley, toward the back entrance." Adrian's expression hardened instantly. "How many?" "Can't tell exactly. At least 3, maybe more." "That's the same door she walked through yesterday," Nico said, already moving toward the kitchen weapon drawn from beneath his jacket. "They know every entrance to this building." "Get her upstairs," Adrian ordered. "Interior room, no windows." "Adrian, I don't want to just hide while. This isn't a discussion." His voice cut through her protest sharp enough that she flinched, and immediately his expression softened, just barely. "Please, let me handle this. I need you safe so I can focus on keeping everyone else that way too." Lena nodded, swallowing whatever argument had been forming, and allowed Dante to guide her quickly up the stairs deeper into the building, away from every exterior wall. Downstairs, Adrian and Nico positioned themselves near the kitchen's rear hallway, watching the back door through the small reinforced window set into its frame, waiting. For nearly a full minute, nothing happened. The silence stretched taut, unbearable every second, dragging like an hour. Then the door handle turned once, slowly testing. It was locked. It held. A second attempt followed, more forceful this time, the frame shuddering under the pressure. "They're trying to force it," Nico whispered. "Let them try." Adrian set his voice low and utterly calm, despite the danger pressing against his own back door. "That door's reinforced steel behind the wood facade. It'll hold longer than they think." A third attempt came, and this time something heavier struck the door, a tool of some kind, and the frame groaned audibly under the impact. "Not forever," Nico muttered. From somewhere beyond the door, muffled voices exchanged words too quiet to make out clearly, and then abruptly the attempts stopped entirely. Silence returned, heavier and more unsettling than the noise had been. "What are they doing?" Nico whispered. Adrian didn't answer. His eyes fixed on the small window, watching for any hint of movement. Long seconds passed. Then, through the reinforced glass, he caught the faint gleam of a flashlight beam sweeping away from the door, retreating. "They're pulling back," Adrian said, disbelief coloring his voice. "Why would they pull back? They had the door half breached." The answer came less than a minute later when Dante's radio crackled again, his voice carrying a different kind of urgency. Now confusion layered over alarm. "Adrian, you need to see this. Front of the building. Right now." Adrian and Nico moved quickly back through the kitchen toward the front of the restaurant, where Dante stood frozen near the window, staring out at the street, with an expression neither man could immediately interpret. "What is it?" Adrian demanded. Dante didn't answer with words. He simply stepped aside, letting Adrian see for himself. Parked directly outside the restaurant's front entrance, lights off, engine running, sat a black sedan that Adrian recognized instantly, one belonging not to Victor Halden's people, but to his own extended network. A car he had loaned out months earlier to an old associate who owed him a considerable favor. As Adrian watched, 3 men stepped out of the vehicle, positioning themselves along the sidewalk, with the unmistakable bearing of men who had done this kind of work for decades, and the man who climbed out last moving unhurried, utterly unbothered by the tension thick in the air around him, was someone Adrian hadn't seen in over 5 years. That's not possible, Adrian murmured. Who is that? Nico asked. Marcus DeLuca. Adrian said slowly, disbelief giving way to something more complicated. My father's old lieutenant, the man who taught me half of what I know about running this territory before he retired and disappeared to the coast. What is he doing here, now tonight of all nights? Adrian moved to the door, opening it, despite Nico's sharp warning, stepping out onto the sidewalk to meet the older man face to face. The men who had attempted to breach the back door were nowhere in sight, having apparently vanished the moment this unexpected arrival appeared. Marcus, Adrian said, genuine shock coloring his voice. It's been years. What are you doing here? The older man's weathered face broke into something between a smile and a grimace. Saving your life from the look of things, Marcus said. You've got some very unfriendly company circling this block, Adrian. Lucky for you, I recognized one of the plates from an old job. Victor Halden's people don't exactly travel quietly if you know what to look for. You know Halden's people. I know a great many people I'd rather not know, Marcus said. Your father asked me a long time ago to keep an eye on you, even after I stepped back. Old habits. He glanced toward the restaurant's darkened windows. I take it this has something to do with the woman everyone's suddenly very interested in finding. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. How much do you know? Oh, enough to know that Victor Halden doesn't send that many resources after someone, unless they're sitting on something that could genuinely bury him. Marcus's expression turned serious. Enough to know you're in over your head if you think this ends with a polite conversation and a show of force outside your restaurant. Then help me, Adrian said, the request costing him something a rare admission of needing assistance from a man who prided himself on never needing it. Whatever you know, whatever resources you still have access to, I need it. Marcus studied him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Your father would have told you to walk away from something this size, Marcus said quietly. Too many powerful people involved, too much collateral risk. I know, but you're not going to walk away, are you? No, Adrian said, without hesitation. I'm not. Marcus's weathered face softened into something almost like pride, buried deep beneath decades of careful control. Then I suppose we'd better get to work, he said. Because if what I've heard is even half true, Victor Halden isn't just moving money through those shell companies of his. My contacts tell me there's a shipment scheduled through the port in 4 days. Container manifest doesn't match anything legitimate. Adrian's blood went cold. A shipment of what? I don't know for certain, Marcus admitted. But if your girl upstairs is who I think she is, and if what she found in Halden's files is even close to what I've heard whispered about, I think you already know the answer. Adrian's jaw clenched, the full, horrifying weight of the timeline crashing down on him at once. 4 days. Whatever Victor Halden was moving through that port, whoever those women in the spreadsheets Lena had described actually were. They had 4 days before it happened. 4 days to stop something that had likely already claimed lives before it ever reached this city's shipping docks. We need everything you have on that shipment, Adrian said. Every detail, every contact. You'll have it, Marcus said. But Adrian, listened to me carefully because I'm only going to say this once. If you go after that shipment directly, you're not just fighting Victor Halden anymore. You're fighting everyone who profits from it staying hidden. Judges, officials, people who will burn this entire city down before they let that kind of exposure reach the surface. Then we make sure it reaches the surface anyway, Adrian said. Because the alternative is letting it happen again and again until nobody's left who's willing to run. Upstairs, unaware of the conversation unfolding on the sidewalk below, Lena sat in the small interior room Dante had guided her to her back against the wall, listening to every distant sound in the building and flinching at each one. When the door finally opened again, and Adrian stepped through something in his face, told her immediately that whatever had happened downstairs had changed the shape of everything. What happened? She asked, rising quickly. I heard voices. I thought, we're not alone in this anymore. Adrian said, an old friend just gave me information that changes everything. What kind of information? Adrian hesitated, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something that looked almost like reluctance in his expression, the weight of a truth he didn't want to hand her, but knew he had no right to withhold. "There's a shipment," he said finally, "through the port. In 4 days. My contact believes it's connected to everything you found in Halden's files." Lena's whole body went rigid, understanding crashing over her before he even finished the sentence. "Women," she whispered. "They're moving women. Through the port. In 4 days. We don't know that for certain yet. We both know it's true." Lena said, her voice shaking, but this time not entirely from fear. Something else had entered it. Something fierce and desperate and determined all at once. "Adrian, if that shipment happens, if it goes through there, won't be any evidence left to find. There won't be anyone left to save. It'll just be gone the same way Danielle is gone, the same way every woman before her disappeared." "I know. Then we have to stop it." She grabbed his arm, her grip tighter than he expected from someone who had spent the last 24 hours trembling with fear. "Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, we have to stop that shipment." Adrian looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face at the fear that had somehow transformed in the space of a single conversation into something closer to resolve. 4 days, he said quietly. "That's not much time to bring down an operation this size." "Then we'd better not waste a single hour of it," Lena said. Downstairs, Nico and Marcus stood near the front window, watching the empty street where Halden's men had briefly appeared, and then vanished. Both men understanding, without needing to say it aloud, that this brief lull was not victory. It was a pause, a recalculation on the other side. And when Victor Halden's response finally came, it would come with the full weight of everything he had spent decades building to protect himself. Marcus turned to Nico, his expression grave. "You know your boss just declared war on half the power structure in this city," he said quietly. "I know," Nico said. "You think he understands what that actually means?" Nico's eyes drifted toward the ceiling, toward the room where Adrian and Lena stood together toward a decision that had been made not out of strategy or profit, but out of something far more dangerous and far more human than either man in that hallway had expected to witness in Adrian Vale. "I think," Nico said slowly, "that for the first time in 20 years, Adrian doesn't care what it means. And that scares me more than Victor Halden ever could." The night stretched on without any of them sleeping. The restaurant's dining room transformed into something closer to a war room. Maps and printouts spread across the long table, where wealthy patrons usually dined in careful anonymity. Marcus sat at the head of it, sleeves rolled up. A man 20 years removed from this life, but slipping back into it with unsettling ease. 4 days, he said, tapping a finger against a printed shipping manifest. Container designation Delta 79, scheduled to clear customs at 11 at night when inspection staff runs skeleton crew. That's not an accident, that's design. "Who has authority to schedule a container for that slot?" Adrian asked. "Port Authority does the scheduling, but exemptions from full inspection require a signature from someone with oversight clearance." Marcus slid a second document across the table. "Guess whose signature is on the exemption request?" Adrian didn't need to guess. He'd already seen the name once today. "Ray Doss," he said. "Confirmed," Nico said, standing near the window, arms crossed. "Same councilman connected to the shell company. This isn't just corruption anymore. This is the exact mechanism they're using to move whatever's inside that container without anyone official ever laying eyes on it." Lena sat at the far end of the table, quiet, absorbing every word, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. "I need to see that manifest," she said suddenly. Marcus slid it toward her without hesitation, and she scanned it with an intensity that surprised everyone in the room, her eyes narrowing at something halfway down the page. "This shipping code," she said, pointing. "Meridian Logistics used a nearly identical formatting pattern on 3 transfers I found in Victor's files. Same prefix, same structure, just different numbers at the end." She looked up. "This isn't the first shipment. This is a system. They've done this before. How many times before? Adrian asked quietly. I don't know. The files I saw only covered about 8 months of records. But if this pattern's been running that long... Her voice caught. There could be dozens of shipments we don't even know about. The weight of that landed heavily across the table, and for a long moment, nobody spoke. We need your evidence, Adrian said finally. The drive. If we're going to move against this before that container clears customs, we need proof strong enough that it can't be buried by a bought judge or a paid-off commissioner. Lena's jaw tightened. It's in Ohio, buried behind a church I used to volunteer at as a kid in a spot only Danielle and I ever knew about. Then someone needs to retrieve it. I have to go myself, Lena said. I never wrote down exactly where. I told Danielle in person, showed her the spot once, but I never trusted it to paper or a message. If someone else goes looking, they won't find it. Not in time. Absolutely not, Adrian said immediately. You're the one person Victor Halden's entire operation is hunting. The moment you step outside the perimeter of people I trust, you're exposed. Then I go with protection, Lena said, meeting his eyes with a stubbornness that surprised him. But I have to go, Adrian. Without that drive, everything we're planning is just guesses and suspicion. We need proof, and I'm the only one who can get it. Marcus watched the exchange with the careful attention of a man who had spent a lifetime reading rooms, and after a moment he cleared his throat. She's right, he said. And I know a way to move her that doesn't put a target on her back the entire drive there. But it means trusting people outside this room. Who? Adrian asked. A retired federal agent I did some work with years back. Owes me a favor large enough to guarantee her safety on that drive. He's clean, Adrian. Genuinely clean, which in this city is rarer than you'd think. Adrian's instinct, honed over 20 years of never fully trusting anyone outside his own circle, screamed against the idea. But he looked at Lena, at the fierce determination that had replaced her fear sometime over the last several hours, and understood that stopping her wasn't actually within his power, not without breaking something between them that he wasn't willing to break. Fine, he said, but I'm sending Dante with her. 2 sets of eyes, 2 ways to move if something goes wrong. Dante, who had been quiet near the kitchen doorway through most of the planning, straightened at the mention of his name. Me. You know how to handle yourself, and you don't panic under pressure, Adrian said. I need someone I trust completely watching her back on that drive. Something flickered across Dante's face, brief and unreadable, gone before anyone could name it. Understood, he said. We'll leave before sunrise. Less traffic, less exposure. The room began to break apart into smaller conversations, logistics and timing and contingencies, and Lena found herself pulled aside by Adrian into the hallway away from the noise. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. There are other ways to build a case. Not fast enough, Lena said. Not before that container clears customs. Adrian, if we miss this window, whoever's inside that shipment, they're gone. Wherever it's headed, whatever's waiting for them there, we won't get a second chance to stop it. Adrian's throat tightened around words he wasn't accustomed to saying to anyone. I don't want anything to happen to you, he said finally, quieter than before. Lena looked up at him, something shifting behind her eyes, exhaustion and fear giving way, just for a moment, to something warmer. Then trust that I'm not running away this time, she said. I'm running towards something for the first time in 6 months. That has to count for something. Adrian didn't answer with words. He reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a small, careful gesture that felt enormous in the charged silence between them, and Lena's breath caught at the tenderness of it, so different from the calculated control he showed the rest of the world. Come back safe, he said. That's all I'm asking. I will. Before sunrise, Lena and Dante slipped out through the same service tunnel that had nearly been breached hours earlier, meeting Marcus's federal contact 3 blocks away in an unmarked sedan that pulled away into the gray pre-dawn light without drawing a second glance from anyone watching the restaurant's main entrances. Back inside, Adrian stood at the window long after the car disappeared, a knot of worry sitting heavy in his chest that he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. You're worried about her, Nico said, appearing at his shoulder. "I'm worried about all of it." Adrian said, though both men understood the distinction wasn't entirely honest. "Adrian." Nico's voice carried a caution that made Adrian turn. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually think about the answer instead of just reacting." "What?" "Are you doing this because it's right, or are you doing this because of her?" The question landed harder than Adrian expected, and he took a moment before answering, genuinely turning it over rather than dismissing it outright. "Does it matter?" he said finally. "The outcome's the same either way. Halden's operation gets exposed. Women who would have disappeared onto that ship don't disappear. It matters because motive changes how carefully a man moves," Nico said. "A man fighting for a cause makes calculated decisions. A man fighting for a woman he's known for 2 days makes reckless ones." "You think I'm being reckless? I think you gave a stranger a bed on faith alone. I think you declared war on a man with judges and commissioners in his pocket less than 24 hours after meeting her. I think you just sent your restaurant manager and the woman herself across state lines with a federal agent you've never personally vetted." Nico's expression was grave. "I'm not questioning whether it's the right thing to do, Adrian. I'm questioning whether you're thinking clearly enough to do it well." Adrian's jaw tightened, old friendship warring with the sting of the accusation. "I hear you," he said finally. "But my mind's made up. This happens with or without your blessing." "You'll have my blessing," Nico said. "You've always had it. I just needed to say it out loud so that whatever happens next, you know I raised the concern honestly." Adrian nodded, something unspoken passing between two men who had trusted each other through 2 decades of dangerous decisions, and neither of them could have known in that quiet moment of honesty how heavily those words would weigh later when everything Nico had warned against started coming true in ways neither of them expected. By mid-morning, Adrian's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, and something instinctive told him to answer it privately away from the others. "Vale. Mr. Vale?" The voice belonged to Marcus's federal contact, and something in his tone immediately put Adrian on alert. "We have a situation." Adrian's stomach dropped. "Is she safe?" "She's safe for now, but we hit a snag about an hour outside the state line. Local police pulled us over for a broken taillight that wasn't broken when we left this morning. Someone tampered with the vehicle. That's my read on it, too. The officer ran our plates and got unusually curious about who was in the car with me, asked for identification from everyone, took an unusually long time doing it. I've done federal work for 15 years. Officers don't behave that way unless someone's told them to be interested." Adrian's grip on the phone tightened. "Are you saying local law enforcement is compromised?" "I'm saying somebody flagged our vehicle before we ever crossed state lines, which means somebody knew our route." The agent's voice was grim. "Mr. Vale, only a handful of people knew which direction we were heading this morning. I'd start asking some very uncomfortable questions about who those people are." The call ended, and Adrian stood frozen in the hallway, the accusation settling over him with a weight that felt like ice water down his spine. Only a handful of people had known Lena and Dante's route. The room where that plan had been finalized had contained exactly 5 people. Himself, Nico, Marcus, Dante, who was in the car, and Lena, who had no motive to sabotage her own escape. That left one name Adrian did not want to consider. And the moment he allowed himself to consider it anyway, a dozen small details from the last 2 days rearranged themselves into a pattern he'd been too distracted to see. Nico had been the one to suggest checking the tunnel's security. Nico had access to every plan Adrian made, every contact Adrian trusted, every movement Adrian's people executed. And Nico had questioned more forcefully than anyone else whether protecting Lena was worth the risk. Adrian told himself it meant nothing. Loyalty tested under pressure sometimes looked like doubt. He had known Nico for 20 years, had trusted him with his life more times than he could count. But the doubt once planted refused to leave. He called Marcus directly this time, keeping his voice level despite the storm building underneath. "I need you to run something for me," Adrian said. Quietly. "No one else in this building can know I'm asking." "What is it?" "Financial records. property records. Anything unusual in the last 6 months for someone very close to me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You think you've got a leak inside your own circle? Marcus said, understanding immediately. I think I have to consider the possibility. Give me the name. Adrian hesitated, the words costing him more than he expected. Nico Belandi, he said finally, and saying it aloud felt like a betrayal in itself, a crack running through 20 years of trust that he wasn't certain could ever fully close again, regardless of what Marcus's investigation turned up. The hours that followed were some of the longest of Adrian's life. He moved through the restaurant mechanically, giving orders, checking security, all while a cold suspicion sat coiled in his chest, poisoning every interaction with Nico. Every glance, every casual conversation, suddenly loaded with a weight it hadn't carried the day before. Nico, unaware of the investigation quietly unfolding behind his back, noticed the shift in Adrian's demeanor almost immediately. You're being strange, Nico said, catching Adrian alone near the kitchen in the early afternoon. Distant. Is something wrong? Did something happen with Lena and Dante? They're fine, Adrian said, too quickly, too flatly. Nico studied him, brow furrowing. You're lying. Adrian, I've known you 20 years. I know what your face looks like when you're hiding something. It's nothing you need to worry about. That's not an answer. Adrian met his oldest friend's eyes, searching for the deception he desperately hoped he wouldn't find, and saw only confusion, only genuine concern, and for a moment the suspicion cracked guilt, flooding in to replace it. Someone flagged their vehicle before it crossed the state line, Adrian said, finally watching Nico's reaction closely despite himself. Local police pulled them over on a manufactured pretext. Someone with knowledge of their route made that happen. Nico's face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, alarm, and then unmistakably offense. You think it was me, Nico said slowly, the realization landing like a blow. That's why you're looking at me like that. You think I sold them out. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Nico's voice rose, hurt, bleeding through the anger. 20 years, Adrian. 20 years I've stood beside you, and the first time something goes wrong, you look at me like I'm the enemy. Someone in this circle leaked their route. Then find out who, but don't stand there and let me watch you decide it's me, without even asking me directly. Nico's jaw was tight, his hands curled at his sides. Ask me. Ask me right now if I did it. Adrian hesitated, and that hesitation alone seemed to wound Nico more than an accusation would have. Did you? Adrian asked quietly. No, Nico said, flat and furious. No, I did not sell out a woman running for her life to Victor Halden's people. I have questioned this plan from the start because I thought it was reckless, not because I wanted it to fail. There's a difference, Adrian, and if 20 years hasn't taught you to see it, I don't know what will. The two men stared at each other across a divide that had never existed between them before, and Adrian felt the ground shifting beneath a friendship he'd considered unshakable. Before either could say anything more, Adrian's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus, and he read it in silence, his expression shifting from tension to something far more complicated. What? Nico demanded. What does it say? Adrian turned the phone around, and Nico read the message himself, understanding immediately why Adrian's expression had changed. The financial records showed nothing unusual for Nico. No suspicious deposits, no unexplained property purchases, nothing connecting him to Victor Halden or his network in any way. But they showed something else entirely. A pattern of payments, small but consistent, running for the last 4 months into an account belonging to someone else in Adrian's inner circle. Someone whose name neither man had considered until this exact moment. Dante Reyes. The restaurant manager, currently 3 hours into a drive across state lines, sitting beside Lena Carter. The very woman he might have just betrayed. That's not possible. Nico breathed. Dante's been with you longer than I have in some capacity. He vetted Lena himself. He wanted to throw her out the first night. Maybe that was exactly the point. Adrian said, his blood running cold, as the pieces reassembled themselves into a far more disturbing picture. Maybe pushing to have her removed was cover. Maybe when that didn't work, he found another way to be useful to whoever's paying him. We have to warn them, Nico said. If Dante's compromised, he's alone in a car with Lena 3 hours from here. Adrian was already dialing the federal agent's number, his hand steady despite the panic clawing up his throat. But the call rang twice 3 times. 4, and went to voicemail without ever connecting. He's not answering, Adrian said, dread pooling heavy in his stomach. Try Lena directly. Adrian dialed the number for the cheap prepaid phone he'd given her before she left, and this time it connected on the second ring, and relief flooded through him at the sound of her voice, immediately followed by fresh alarm at how tense it sounded. Adrian. Lena's voice was barely a whisper, hurried, hushed. I can't talk long. Something's wrong. Where's Dante? He said he needed to make a call, stepped outside the gas station we stopped at. A pause filled with static and her own uneven breathing. Adrian, he's been checking his phone constantly since we left the city. Texting someone. He gets defensive every time I ask who. Listen to me very carefully, Adrian said, his voice dropping into the low, controlled register he used only when the stakes were at their absolute highest. We have reason to believe Dante's been compromised. I need you to get away from him. Now. Do you understand me? Silence stretched on the other end of the line, heavy with the particular horror of a suspicion confirmed. He knows where the drive is buried, Lena whispered finally. I told him the general area on the drive here in case something happened to me before we got there. Adrian, if he's working for Victor. Where are you right now exactly? A gas station off Route 9, maybe 40 minutes from the church. Can you see him? Another pause, and Adrian heard her shift, heard the soft creak of a car door. He's still outside, she whispered, talking on his phone. His back's to me. Get out of the car, Adrian said. Quietly. Find somewhere to hide inside the store. I'm sending Marcus's contact to your exact location right now, and I'm calling local law enforcement. Marcus vouches for personally. Do not let Dante see you move. Adrian, I'm scared. I know, he said, and something in his voice cracked, despite every effort to keep it controlled. I know you are, but you have survived every single moment that's tried to break you for 6 months straight. This is one more. You can survive this one too. The line went quiet, and for 3 unbearable seconds, Adrian thought the call had dropped before Lena's voice returned steadier than before, fortified by something that sounded almost like fury. I'm not letting him take me, she said. Not after everything. I'm not going back to being someone's prisoner. You won't have to. Just get somewhere safe and stay hidden. Help is coming. The call ended, and Adrian was moving before he'd even fully processed the decision, grabbing his jacket, shouting orders to Nico. Every trace of the tension between them from moments earlier burned away by the far greater urgency now consuming them both. I'm going after her, Adrian said. It's 3 hours away. Adrian, you won't make it in time if... Then I'll make it in time to finish whatever's happening when I get there, Adrian said, already moving toward the door. Get Marcus. Get everyone we have. I am not losing her because I trusted the wrong man with her safety. Nico grabbed his arm, stopping him for just a moment. Adrian. His voice was rough with an emotion he rarely let surface. I know you don't fully trust me right now, and I understand why. But let me help you fix this. Let me prove where my loyalty actually stands. Adrian looked at his oldest friend, at the genuine desperation in his face, and made a decision that would either restore 20 years of trust or shatter it entirely. Come with me, he said. Both of us. Now. They tore out of the restaurant into a black sedan, Nico driving while Adrian worked the phones, coordinating with Marcus, with the federal agent, whose calls were suddenly connecting again, his voice tight with his own version of the same story unfolding at the gas station 3 hours away. I lost sight of her for 2 minutes. The agent admitted, guilt heavy in his voice. Dante told me he needed gas. I stepped inside to grab coffee, and when I came back out, she wasn't in the car. Is Dante still there? Gone. Both of them are gone. The words hit Adrian like a physical blow, and for one terrible suspended moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the image of Lena disappearing into the same darkness that had already swallowed Danielle the detective, everyone who had ever tried to help her. Find them, Adrian said, his voice raw. I don't care what it costs. Find them. But even as he said it, some instinct deep inside him, some fragile, desperate hope, refused to accept that this was how it ended. Lena had survived 6 months of running. She had survived. Cleveland survived a fire meant to kill her, survived losing everyone who had ever tried to help. She had told him in the last words he'd heard from her that she wasn't letting anyone take her again. Adrian held on to that thought as the car raced through the darkening evening toward a gas station off Route 9, where the woman who had walked into his life through a back door 2 days ago was either fighting for her life at this very moment, or had already found a way to disappear from the danger entirely on her own. Either way, Adrian understood with sudden absolute clarity, staring out at the blur of headlights streaking past the window, that he was no longer capable of imagining his life continuing forward without knowing she was safe within it. The gas station's fluorescent lights flickered against the gathering dark as Adrian's car screeched into the lot tires, skidding against loose gravel, his heart slamming against his ribs so hard it hurt. Empty. No black sedan. No sign of Lena. No sign of Dante. Marcus's federal contact stood near the pump's phone, pressed to his ear, his face pale with the particular guilt of a man who understood exactly how badly he had failed at the one job entrusted to him. Where? Adrian started, then stopped, forcing his voice into something steadier, before he tried again. Where exactly did you last see her? Right here. The agent gestured toward the pump behind him. She was in the passenger seat. I went inside for 2 minutes. 2 minutes, Mr. Vale. When I came back, the car door was open and she was gone. And Dante? Also gone. I checked the security footage inside before you arrived. The agent's jaw tightened. There's a blind spot between the pumps and the tree line behind the station. Whatever happened, happened there. Nico was already moving toward the tree line flashlight, cutting through the deepening dusk, and Adrian followed every nerve in his body, screaming with a fear he hadn't let himself feel this intensely in 20 years. Lena! Adrian's voice tore through the quiet evening, raw and desperate in a way that would have embarrassed him in any other circumstance. Elena. Nothing answered but the distant hum of highway traffic. They pushed deeper into the tree line. Flashlights sweeping across underbrush and broken branches, and Adrian's mind kept looping back to the same unbearable image: Lena disappearing. The same way Danielle had disappeared. The same way the detective had disappeared. One more name added to a list of people who had tried to help her and paid for it with everything. Then Nico's flashlight caught something pale against the dark ground 20 yards ahead, and both men froze. A shoe. A single shoe lying on its side in the dirt. That's hers, Adrian said, his voice breaking. That's Lena's. He surged forward, dropping to his knees beside it, scanning the ground desperately for any other sign, any indication of which direction she'd gone or been taken, and that was when he heard it, faint, muffled, coming from somewhere further into the trees. A voice, raised, angry. Move, Adrian breathed, and both men took off toward the sound weapons, drawn adrenaline drowning out every rational thought, except the singular desperate need to reach her before it was too late. They broke through a final line of brush into a small clearing, and what Adrian saw there stopped him cold. Understanding crashing over him in a wave so disorienting it took a full second to process. Lena stood in the center of the clearing, breathing hard, her hair disheveled, one shoe missing exactly as the discarded one had suggested. But she wasn't restrained. She wasn't cowering. She was standing over Dante Reyes, who lay on the ground clutching his shoulder, a tire iron discarded a few feet away, blood seeping between his fingers. Lena! Adrian gasped, rushing forward. Are you hurt? What happened? I'm fine, she said, and her voice, though shaking, carried a fierceness Adrian hadn't heard from her before. I'm fine, Adrian. He's the one who's hurt. Adrian looked down at Dante, understanding slowly dawning. You did this. He grabbed me by the car, Lena said. Told me to get in, said Victor's people were closer than I thought, and he was getting me somewhere safe. I didn't believe him. Not after your call. I ran, and when he caught up to me here, he made the mistake of telling me exactly why I needed to come quietly. What did he say? Nico demanded, crouching beside Dante, pressing a hand against the wound to slow the bleeding despite everything. He said Victor promised him enough money to start over somewhere far away from this life. Lena said, her voice trembling with fury now instead of fear. Said all he had to do was make sure I got in the car without a fight. Said it wasn't personal. It's always personal, Adrian said quietly, staring down at the man he had trusted for 12 years, feeling something cold and final settle in his chest. Why Dante after everything? After 12 years? Dante's face twisted, pain and shame warring across his features. You don't know what it's like, he rasped. Watching you build an empire while I clean up messes for a fraction of what you take home. Victor offered me more in one payment than you've paid me in 3 years combined. I told myself it was just information, just knowing which way she was heading. I never thought. You never thought it would come to violence. Adrian finished, disgust coloring his voice. You handed a woman over to a trafficking network and told yourself it was just information. I panicked, Dante said. When the agent went inside, I saw my chance, and Victor's man told me if I didn't bring her in myself, he'd make sure I disappeared too. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, Lena said, her voice hard, unforgiving. I had a choice every single day for 6 months to stop running and just let them catch me. I chose to keep fighting instead. You had a choice too. You chose money over a person's life. The federal agent arrived moments later, having tracked their flashlights through the trees and quickly assessed the situation, calling it in to Marcus's trusted local contacts, rather than standard channels, understanding immediately the complications of involving anyone who might already be compromised by Victor Halden's reach. As paramedics arrived to stabilize Dante for transport, and local officers, Marcus vouched for personally took him into custody. Adrian pulled Lena aside, his hands trembling as he finally allowed himself to reach for her, to confirm with his own touch that she was actually standing in front of him, actually safe. I thought I lost you, he said, voice cracking on the words. When I couldn't reach you when the car was empty, I thought. I know, Lena said, leaning into him, her own composure finally cracking now that the immediate danger had passed. I thought about it too. For about 10 seconds when he grabbed my arm, I thought this was it. This was how it ended. What changed? I remembered what you said. She looked up at him, her eyes wet but steady. That I'd survived every single thing that tried to break me for 6 months, and I could survive one more. So I fought. I hit him with the tire iron from the trunk before he could get me into the car, and I ran and I hid, and I waited for you to find me. You didn't need me to find you, Adrian said softly. You'd already saved yourself. Maybe, Lena said. But knowing you were coming, that made it easier to keep fighting instead of freezing. Nico approached them, then his expression grave despite the relief evident in his posture. Adrian, we have a problem. Dante's phone. Before the ambulance took him, I checked it. He's been in constant contact with someone tonight, someone who's been tracking their location the entire drive. They know where we are, Adrian said, understanding immediately. They know where she was, Nico corrected. But if we move fast, we might still have the advantage. And Adrian, there's something else. He held up the phone, showing a string of messages still visible on the screen. Dante wasn't just supposed to bring her in. Victor's already moved up the shipment. It's not 4 days out anymore. It's tomorrow night. The words landed like a physical blow. They know we're closing in, Adrian said. They're accelerating the timeline to get it out before we can stop it. Then we don't have 4 days to build a case, Marcus said, arriving on foot from where he'd parked further down the road, having driven separately once Adrian's call came through. We have about 18 hours. Lena straightened, the exhaustion and fear on her face, giving way to something harder, more determined. Then we go get the drive right now. Tonight. No more waiting. You're in no condition to keep going, Adrian said. You've just been through. I'm in exactly the condition to finish this. Lena interrupted, her voice steady, despite everything. Adrian, if that shipment leaves tomorrow night, whoever's inside those containers is gone. We don't get a second chance at this. I am not stopping now, not when we're this close. Adrian looked at her, at the fire that had replaced the fear he'd first seen in her eyes 2 days ago, and understood there was no version of tonight where he successfully talked her out of finishing what she'd started. Then we go together, he said. All of us. No more splitting up, no more trusting anyone outside this circle. They reached the church an hour later, the small building dark and quiet against the night sky. And Lena led them without hesitation to a spot behind an old stone wall at the edge of the property, kneeling in the dirt and digging with her bare hands until her fingers struck something solid. She pulled free a small waterproof case, and inside it, wrapped in plastic, sat a flash drive that had cost her 6 months of running a best friend's disappearance and more fear than any person should have to carry alone. This is it, she said, her voice shaking as she held it up. Everything Victor Halden's been trying to bury. Marcus took it carefully, connecting it to a laptop he'd brought along, and the small group huddled around the screen as files began to populate, spreadsheet after spreadsheet, financial transfer after financial transfer. And buried among them, the thing that made Adrian's blood run absolutely cold. Photographs, names, dates. A documented trail of women moved through exactly the kind of shipping lane Marcus had identified, spanning back nearly 3 years. My God, Nico breathed, staring at the screen. This isn't dozens of women. This is over 100. Lena's hand flew to her mouth, tears finally breaking free after 6 months of holding them back. I knew it was bad. I never let myself imagine it was this bad. This is more than enough to bring down Victor Halden, Marcus said, his voice grim but certain. This is more than enough to bring down Ray Doss and anyone else whose name appears in these files. But we need to get this into the right hands fast before Victor realizes it's been recovered. Not local police, Adrian said immediately. Not with Doss potentially having reach into every department in this city. I know exactly who to call, Marcus said. A federal task force out of the regional office, people I trust completely, people who've been trying to build a human trafficking case in this region for 2 years without ever getting a break big enough to move on it. He looked at Lena. You just handed them exactly that. Within the hour, Marcus's contacts had mobilized a small, tightly controlled operation forming around the evidence Lena had carried through 3 cities and 2 fake names, all of it converging now toward a single decisive night. They gathered at the restaurant one final time, the same building where this had all begun 2 days earlier, transformed now into a command center for something far larger than any of them had anticipated when Lena first walked through that back door. The container clears customs at 11 tomorrow night. The lead federal agent explained, a woman named Agent Raina Cole, who had flown in personally once Marcus made the call, her expression sharp and focused. We're going to let it clear. Let it move to the secondary holding area and take it there along with everyone connected to receiving it. That way we catch the entire chain, not just the shipment. And Victor Halden? Adrian asked. Simultaneous arrest, timed to the minute the container's intercepted, so he doesn't have time to destroy evidence, or flee once word starts spreading. Agent Cole's eyes flicked toward Lena. Ms. Marsh, your testimony is going to be central to this case. I won't lie to you, that means exposure. Once this becomes public, your name becomes public too. Lena's hands tightened in her lap, old fear flickering briefly across her face before something steadier replaced it. I've been hiding for 6 months, she said. I'm done hiding. If my name being public means Victor Halden finally faces what he's done, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. You understand there could be retaliation, even after his arrest. People connected to his network, who might still want you silenced. I understand, Lena said. But I'd rather live the rest of my life in danger and known than keep living the way I have for the last 6 months, disappearing a little more every single day. Adrian reached over and took her hand, and she let him, drawing strength from the simple grounding warmth of it. "She won't be facing that danger alone," Adrian said. "Whatever protection she needs, for as long as she needs it, that's not a question." Agent Cole studied the two of them for a moment, something almost like understanding softening her professional demeanor. "Then let's make sure tomorrow night goes exactly as planned." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation tension, coiling tighter with every passing hour as 11 o'clock approached. Adrian barely slept, barely ate his mind, cycling endlessly through every possible way the operation could fall apart, every contingency Victor Halden's network might have in place. Lena spent the day giving a formal statement to Agent Cole's team, walking through every detail of what she'd found, what she'd witnessed, what she'd lost in the process of trying to do the right thing. It was exhausting in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, dragging up 6 months of trauma and forcing her to relive it in careful, methodical detail for people who needed every piece of it documented. When it was finally over, she found Adrian waiting outside the room, and the moment she saw him, something in her chest loosened for the first time all day. "How did it go?" he asked. "Hard," she admitted, "but necessary. Agent Cole says my statement combined with the drive is enough to guarantee indictments, even if some of the physical evidence from tonight's operation gets complicated." "That's good." "It should feel good," Lena said, sinking onto a bench beside him. "Why doesn't it feel good?" "Because it's not over yet," Adrian said quietly. "Not until tonight actually happens. Not until we know it worked." Night fell heavy and tense over the city, and by 10:30, Adrian, Lena, Nico, and Marcus sat together in a car parked at a discreet distance from the port, watching through binoculars as federal agents moved into position around the holding area, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. "This is the hardest part," Marcus murmured. "The waiting." Lena's hand found Adrian's in the dark, gripping it tightly, and he held on without hesitation, both of them watching the port's distant lights with hearts hammering in unison. At 10:58, the container cleared customs exactly as scheduled, moving on its designated path toward the secondary holding area. Everything proceeding precisely as Agent Cole's intelligence had predicted. At 11:03, radio chatter crackled through Marcus's earpiece, and his face tightened with focus. "They're moving in," he said quietly. The minutes that followed felt like hours, no visual confirmation reaching them from their distant vantage point. Only fragments of radio traffic code words and confirmations that meant nothing to Adrian or Lena, but clearly carried weight for Marcus and Nico, both leaning forward, listening intently. Then Marcus's shoulders dropped, tension releasing all at once. "They've secured the container," he said. "Agents report multiple individuals recovered inside alive being processed for medical attention now." Lena's breath caught a sob breaking free before she could stop it. "Alive," she repeated. "They're alive." 23 women, Marcus confirmed, listening to the continuing report. "All alive, all being transported to secure medical facilities." Adrian pulled Lena into him, and she cried against his chest, 6 months of grief and fear and desperate hope finally finding release in the knowledge that this time, this once they had been in time. "And Halden?" Adrian asked, his voice rough. Marcus listened for another moment, then a slow, grim smile spread across his weathered face. "Simultaneous raid on his estate," he confirmed. "Victor Halden is in federal custody as of 90 seconds ago. Ray Doss was picked up 20 minutes prior at a private club downtown." The relief that flooded through the car was almost physical, a collective exhale from 4 people who had spent the last 2 days living on the edge of catastrophe. "It's over," Lena whispered, still holding tight to Adrian. "It's actually over." "Not entirely," Marcus cautioned gently. "There will be trials, depositions, media attention neither of you are prepared for. This is the end of one battle, not the entire war." "But it's a battle we won," Adrian said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "For the first time in 6 months, Elena, you're not running anymore." The weeks that followed brought exactly the storm Agent Cole had warned them about. Victor Halden's arrest became national news. Within days, the scale of his trafficking operation shocking a public that had known him only as a respected businessman and philanthropist. Ray Doss's involvement toppled half the Port Authority's leadership, an investigation spreading outward like ripples from a stone dropped into still water, catching officials, judges, and business partners who had spent years believing themselves untouchable. Lena's name entered the public record as the whistleblower who had risked everything to expose the network. And while the attention was overwhelming at times, it came paired with something she hadn't expected: an outpouring of support from strangers, from advocacy organizations, from other survivors who reached out once they understood what she had endured to bring the truth to light. Danielle's case, reopened under the weight of the new investigation, finally received the attention it had been denied for months. It took weeks, but eventually, evidence recovered from one of Halden's associates confirmed what Lena had feared, but also revealed something she hadn't dared hope for. Danielle was alive. She had been held moved between locations as part of the same network, but federal agents recovered her during a secondary raid connected to Halden's broader operation, and the day Lena received the call, confirming it, she collapsed to her knees in the restaurant's private dining room, unable to hold herself upright under the weight of relief so enormous it felt like drowning. Adrian was there within seconds, catching her before she hit the floor, and when she finally managed to explain through her sobs what the call had told her, he held her and let himself feel for the first time in longer than he could remember something that felt disturbingly close to unguarded joy. "She's alive," Lena kept repeating, as if saying it enough times would make it feel real. "Adrian, she's alive. I didn't kill her by asking her to help me. She's alive." "You never killed anyone," Adrian said fiercely, holding her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "You saved her. You saved 23 other women. You saved people you'll never even meet because Victor Halden's network is finished, and it's finished because you refused to stop fighting." The reunion, when it finally happened, was something Adrian watched from a respectful distance. Understanding this moment belonged entirely to Lena and Danielle. Two women who had survived something unimaginable and found their way back to each other against every possible odd. He watched Lena sob into her best friend's shoulder, watched Danielle whisper apologies and gratitude in equal measure, watched 6 months of grief and guilt and desperate hope finally resolve into something that looked, for the first time, like genuine peace. Nico approached Adrian as they stood together watching the reunion unfold across the room. "I owe you an apology," Nico said quietly, "for questioning whether this was worth it, for questioning you." "You had reason to question it," Adrian said. "I was reckless. I put everyone in this building at risk based on instinct rather than strategy." "Maybe," Nico said. "But sometimes instinct sees things strategy misses. 23 women are alive tonight because you trusted something you couldn't fully explain the moment you looked at a stranger in that alley and saw someone worth protecting." He glanced toward Lena, still embracing Danielle across the room. "I've never seen you like this, Adrian. Not once in 20 years." "Like what?" "Certain," Nico said simply. "About something that has nothing to do with business or power or territory. Certain about a person." Adrian didn't answer right away, watching Lena laugh through her tears at something Danielle had said, watching the way relief transformed her entire face, stripping away 6 months of accumulated fear all at once. "I am certain," Adrian said finally, "for the first time in longer than I can remember." Months passed and the trials moved forward with a momentum that surprised even Agent Cole, the sheer weight of evidence Lena had recovered making Victor Halden's defense increasingly untenable. Ray Doss, facing decades in federal prison, eventually agreed to cooperate, providing additional testimony that widened the investigation, further exposing connections neither Lena nor Adrian had anticipated: corrupt officials who had spent years believing their positions made them invincible. Lena testified twice, her voice steady each time, despite the exhaustion of reliving her trauma in front of courtrooms and cameras. And each time Adrian sat in the gallery, close enough that she could find his face in the crowd whenever the weight of it threatened to overwhelm her. The restaurant, once the site of the most dangerous 48 hours of both their lives, slowly returned to something resembling normalcy, though nothing about it ever quite felt the same as before Lena had walked through that back door. Priya, having returned once the immediate danger passed, found Lena one evening cleaning up after closing the same station where she'd worked her very first trial shift. "You know you don't have to do this anymore," Priya said, gesturing at the sink. "You're basically running half this restaurant's outreach program now. Dishwashing seems like a step backward." Lena smiled, something easy and genuine that hadn't existed in her face during those first frightened days. "I like coming back to it sometimes. Reminds me where I started. Reminds me how far I've come since then." "You've come pretty far," Priya agreed. "From a woman who flinched every time a door opened to someone testifying in federal court against one of the most powerful men in this city." "I had help," Lena said. "A lot of it." "You had Adrian," Priya said, a knowing smile tugging at her mouth. Lena's cheeks warmed, but she didn't deny it. Later that night, after the restaurant had emptied and the last of the staff had gone home, Adrian found Lena standing near the same back door she'd first walked through. Months of history compressed into the simple, ordinary space of a doorway. "Remembering something?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Everything," Lena said softly. "I stood right here, terrified, certain I was making the worst decision of my life, walking into a mafia boss's restaurant asking for a job. Was it the worst decision? It was the best one," Lena said, turning to face him. "It saved my life. It saved 23 other lives. It gave me Danielle back. It gave me—" She paused, searching for words that felt suddenly inadequate for everything she wanted to say. "It gave me you." Adrian reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers, something he'd done 100 times in the months since that first terrifying night, but which still made her heart skip every single time. "I built this entire life around the idea that power meant keeping people at a distance," he said quietly. "That vulnerability was a weakness I couldn't afford. Then a stranger walked through my back door, hiding a fear I recognized immediately because I'd spent my whole life running from something similar, just in a different direction." "What were you running from?" "The idea that I could ever actually care about someone enough to be afraid of losing them," Adrian admitted. "I've built an empire on never needing anyone. You walked in and made that impossible in the span of about 12 hours. Lena's eyes filled, though this time the tears carried nothing but warmth. "I was so certain I'd bring nothing but danger into your life." "You brought danger," Adrian agreed. "You also brought the first purpose I've felt in this life beyond simply surviving it. You taught me that real power isn't about keeping people at a distance. It's about having the strength to protect the people who matter, even when it costs you everything you thought you understood about yourself." He pulled her closer, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything, standing together in the quiet restaurant at the exact spot where two terrified strangers had first collided months earlier and changed the entire trajectory of both their lives. "I'm not scared anymore," Lena said finally, her voice steady, certain. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, I wake up every morning and I'm not scared." "You don't have to be," Adrian said. "Not anymore. Not while I'm here. Is that a promise?" "It's not a promise," Adrian said, echoing words he'd said to her on that very first terrifying night. "It's a fact. I don't intend to spend the rest of my life letting you face anything alone." Lena smiled up at him, the same woman who had once walked through this door clutching nothing but a worn handbag, a fake resume, and a desperate, aching fear transformed now into someone who stood tall, who spoke her truth in courtrooms full of strangers, who had traded a life of hiding for a life of standing firmly in the light. Victor Halden would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Ray Doss would follow him there within the year. The network that had stolen so much from so many women was dismantled piece by piece, thread by thread, until nothing remained of the empire that had once seemed untouchable. And Lena Carter, the woman who had walked into a mafia boss's restaurant asking for nothing more than a job, found instead the one thing she'd stopped believing she deserved after 6 months of running. She found somewhere to finally fully belong. Some people spend their entire lives searching for safety in all the wrong places, mistaking silence for peace and hiding for survival. But real safety was never about disappearing. It was about being seen fully and completely by someone willing to stand between you and every danger the world could throw your way, and choosing every single day afterward to stay standing there.